Welcome to the Economy Magazine. I'm Binyamin Tjong-Alvares with the Economic Report. Coming up, California struggles to resolve drought. And a new luxury bus in San Francisco solves traffic for some. First, the headlines. Leaders from Asia and Africa convened at the Asian-African Business Summit on Tuesday, hoping for a breakthrough to strengthen international trade. Bilateral trade with Africa stood at $200 billion in China and $70 billion in India. Two-way trade between Southeast Asia's largest economy and 54 African nations reached $10.7 billion in 2012. Leaders from both continents aspire to strengthen cooperation, but African leaders in particular remain concerned about the current trade imbalance.
We need to increase trade between Africa and Asia to ensure the realization of our respective economic development agendas. We need also to address the current trade imbalance that exists between our two continents.
We must increase our cooperation, especially in economic and trade sectors. We must enact good policies and take the right actions to minimize the burden of tariff and non-tariff trade, and we must encourage direct trade by enhancing trade facilitation.
Oil prices dipped on Tuesday on expectations of another rise in U.S. stockpiles and as Saudi Arabia keeps output near record highs. Brent crude for June delivery was down 47 cents at $62.98 a barrel in morning trade, and U.S. crude for May delivery was down 54 cents at $55.84 a barrel. Crude prices have climbed around 16% since the start of April, driven by concerns over the conflict in Yemen and as the U.S. domestic oil rig count hit 2010 lows. U.S. commercial crude oil inventories are forecast to have increased by 2.4 million barrels, rising for the 15th consecutive week, according to a Reuters survey. The euro softened across the board on Tuesday, weighed down by worries of an impending Greek default and potential exit from the currency union. The euro dropped 0.7% to the dollar and 0.3% against the Swiss franc, close to its lowest in nearly 3 months. Greece's two-year bond yields were closing in on 30%, and benchmark 10-year yields rose to 13.58%. As an imminent bailout deal remains elusive, negative headlines about Greece continue to push investors to short the single currency. Greece could run out of cash by the end of this month and is struggling to pay civil service salaries and IMF loans due in early May. Cirque du Soleil's world-famous acrobats were bought by TPG Capital and Chinese conglomerate Fosun in a deal that values their troupe at about $1.5 billion. The global circus said the deal would allow it to expand new consumer brands and media partnerships. Through Fosun, it would also enjoy greater reach and access to the Chinese market, the entertainment company said. Fosun, the largest privately owned conglomerate in China, recently also bought Club Méditerranée as it expands its leisure portfolio. California has proposed rules calling for mandatory reductions in water use by municipal agencies as historic drought drags into a 4th year. I-24 News journalist Drought reports on what that means for heavy water users in California's more affluent communities.
In the face of an ongoing major drought, urban Californians have been called on by Governor Jerry Brown to cut water usage by an overall 25% in under a year. An earlier plan for voluntary cuts to water usage toward a 20% goal did not succeed, so under the updated plan, urban water companies will see it fined for not achieving cuts. As cities such as San Francisco face lighter cuts after voluntarily cutting water usage, the upper-class Los Angeles area of Beverly Hills, full of swimming pools and well-kept lawns, is facing a cut of about 35% because residents there have not cut back on use.
Beverly Hills does have larger yards, a lot of landscaping. In the past, water has been very plentiful. It is a huge culture change and way of thinking that we need to change with our citizens, and I think that's common across Southern California. thinking about how to do it differently and how to look differently, and it'll be a challenge.
The drought is the worst in recorded history for California, which is the biggest economy in the United States. Reports hold that water reserves for the state are dwindling. All eyes are on rationing and collective responsibility as the state looks to weather the drought.
We need to raise rates for water use, especially for the higher water users. One question that I think has a moral dimension is just because you have more land, does that entitle you to use proportionally more water? Because in the end, at this point, the water that people put on their grass is the water they and us will not be able to drink in the next several months.
Meanwhile, agricultural water usage cuts are still being worked out and will prove challenging as California, according to Bloomberg, faced approximately $5 billion loss to drought last year.
And now for a look at economic issues and developments around the Middle East in Financial Bazaar with I-24 News correspondent Ayman Siksak. Ayman, thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here.
So I understand you're taking us to Turkey first.
Yes. Well, actually, I'm taking you mainly to Saudi Arabia, and then we're going to visit several countries while we talk about Saudi Arabia.
Good.
A lot of people are eyeing Saudi Arabian money right now, mainly Arab countries. And as you said, we're going to start with Turkey. In a visit in Turkey, the financial minister of Turkey said that the two countries, Turkey and Saudi Arabia, will plan to upgrade their economic and trade ties. They will establish two technical committees together to understand how to increase investment in Turkey and to better their ties throughout the upcoming few years. Now, they've had a very nice history together. Trade between Turkey and Arab countries reached $53 billion last year. They want to reach $70 billion by next year. So this would be very good for Turkey, which is a little bit in turmoil right now, with Erdogan being, some people say, more and more extreme. The tides are shifting politically for Turkey, and it needs Saudi Arabia on its side.
Is this also a move, a shift that we see because of a threat from Iran that Saudi Arabia might perceive?
Absolutely. I mean, Saudi Arabia and Iran are, as we know, arch nemesis enemies, and what Saudi Arabia is doing is establishing its ties right now with several other countries, which it hopes will be on its side rather than Iran's.
Okay. What next?
Well, Greece is also doing a similar move with Saudi Arabia. Greece, the Greek Minister of Tourism, visited Saudi Arabia in hopes to increase tourism from Saudi Arabia to Greece, and they're mainly targeting the really high-end, high-profile, very, very rich customers to come to Greece. And this comes at a sensitive time for Greece. Last year, there was a 3% increase in tourism from Saudi Arabia to Greece. They want to increase that a lot more, because Saudi Arabian tourists tend to spend a lot of money on vacation. So they're interested in attracting them more.
Which could definitely be of interest to them, of course, in Greece, considering the hard times that they're having.
Exactly. Greece right now needs all the boost it can get. We know that the Greek economy is unstable, to say the least.
Okay, and finally?
Finally, not such good news for the Arab world in general. Even though this does not really apply to Saudi Arabia, the unemployment in the Arab world in general, a new report that was released yesterday shows, has reached 17%. That's 3 times higher than the global average. That means that there's about 20 million people in the Arab world that are unemployed right now.
We're talking specifically the young people also, right?
Exactly. We're talking about the young people, which makes the problem even worse. These are the people who are supposed to be sometimes educated, with a better future, with better prospects.
Starting families. And little kids to feed.
Exactly, and a higher potential than older people of getting hired. And what we're seeing is a vast increase in young people being out of a job. One of the factors is less investments in the Arab world.
Okay, well, very interesting. Ayman Siksak, thanks for joining us on Financial Bazaar.
Thank you, Binyamin.
I hope to have you again soon. Thank you. While most San Francisco residents suffer slow, overcrowded commutes, some ride to work in style. A new startup has created a luxury bus service that offers passengers Wi-Fi, fresh coffee, and comfortable seating. But the exclusive service is not welcomed by all.
Like commuters around the world, Adriana Butler takes the bus to work each morning. But this is far from your typical public transportation experience. Known as Leap, the private luxury service shuttles people downtown in total comfort. You use your app here. You hit that, and then you scan it when you come in. It's easy, it's much more comfortable, and it's quick. Inside this high-tech bus, passengers enjoy spacious leather seats, complimentary drinks, and free Wi-Fi.
I love being able to log into my laptop. Normally on the bus, I'm sardined in with a number of other people, and it's wasted time in the morning, but now I can actually make my commute productive.
San Francisco's public transportation system has one of the worst reputations in the country. It is notorious for being crowded, unreliable, and painfully slow. Leap costs $6, nearly triple the price of a regular bus ticket. But it seems more and more young commuters are willing to pay the price.
Right now, commuters only have two major options to get to the office. At peak times, public transit can be hard to get a seat, and private car sharing services can be very expensive. We set out to build something enjoyable, predictable, and stress-free, something that feels a little bit more like your living room than a regular city bus.
But some people see the private company as yet another new symbol of inequality in a city already famous for its spiraling living costs. Last year, protesters blocked private buses run by Facebook and Google to bring their employees to work. Commuter Aaron McElroy says schemes like this divide the community.
It says a lot that you need access to different technology to ride a bus. And certain companies try to bypass working towards improving public transportation and instead invent their own systems that really only privilege those already with privilege.
Thank you. For now, Leap only hosts a few passengers per day, but the company already plans to expand to other neighborhoods in the city.
And we stay in California with Daniel Roth in Media Watch. Daniel, thanks for joining us.
How's it going?
Good. So I understand we're going to continue looking at the water crisis in California.
Yes, California is the name of the game, and of course, this is tomorrow is Earth Day,
Yes.
the 45th Earth Day. So it comes at a good time to speak about this.
Indeed.
It's also, as we reported, a terrible, terrible time for California. They're arguably. They may run out of water in a year. There are some reports, a NASA report came out saying that their water reserves will be done in a year if their use keeps going as it's going and if their reserves aren't replenished. A storm in midwinter helped to replenish, but didn't do a lot.
Right.
Now, what we're actually talking about now is Nestle. Nestle is a company that is the biggest bottled water producer in the United States. Last month, activists shut them down, shut their mid-California, Central California factory down because they use about 80 billion gallons of water a year.
80 billion gallons.
From the Sacramento aquifer.
Which you then bottle and sell.
Bottled and sold. So from the Sacramento aquifer, they're put into bottles and they're sold. Now, that's on one hand, so it's interesting. Activists actually went out there, shut down the factory for a day to say, look, we're in a crisis. We are in a crisis, and here you are doing what corporations do, which is care about their bottom line.
It's curious, considering that, I mean, you would think that the government would be more involved with it. I mean, you see people continuing to water their lawns. People continue to use water as freely as they always have. What is the government doing about this? I mean, and is Nestle at fault here? I mean, this is their business, right?
Well, so it's an interesting question. The government is doing very little. Since 1988, actually, Nestle, this is the other half of the story, Nestle has been working without a license, without a permit to transport water through a national park in California.
So we're talking 27 years? 27
years they've been operating without a permit for transporting this water. Now the head of Nestle said, don't worry, we're taking care.
I'm sure they are.
So, I mean, this is a long way of answering your question that the government's not doing very much. This company's the company's not been it hasn't had a permit for 27 years, and they've been operating, and they're the biggest. This isn't a small-time company that slipped through the cracks.
Right.
This is a huge company in Canada. They've been signing a number of questionable deals for sale of lakes in BC and other provinces.
Right.
So it's, when we're looking at Earth Day, when we're looking at droughts, and we're looking at Nestle, we're seeing that the connections aren't being made between the regulations that are necessary in order to ensure the longevity of not only life but business.
No, you mentioned just now Canada. I mean, Canada has an abundance of water, doesn't it? I mean, it's less of an issue there, isn't it?
Well, Canada has the most lakes, most fresh water in the world. It's doing very well, but we're going to find that if the Canadian government, if provincial governments start to lease and sell that water, that water's not going to last. And Canada has a very small population. America has a giant population compared to the land masses that they're on. But when you start to privatize water sources, then you put at risk the real need that everyone has.
Okay, well, Daniel Roth, thanks for opening our eyes to the situation in California and in general in the water industry. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that concludes our Economy Magazine, your daily source for economic and financial reports at I-24 News. I'm Binyamin Tjong-Alvares. Thanks for joining us, and join us again tomorrow for more on the economy.